inviting me to present at your meeting. My name is Betsy Silverman, and I am a collage artist, as Marjorie just explained to you. And I wanted to say, collage has been around for centuries, and I hope tonight that I can present a different view of collage, something that I do, which is based on photorealism. So thank you, Marjorie, for your patience and guidance in bringing around this presentation, and to all the members of the Franklin Art Association for including me in your presentation this month. And I just want to say that collage art has been, it's something that I got interested in as an art form, and some of the ways I like to use this medium, I'd like to try to demonstrate in a presentation to you to explain my process. There are a lot of questions about why I do what I do. So I hope that some of this will answer some maybe, I don't know, questions that you have, but also illustrate things that might explain how the process happens. So it's a power presentation that I'm going to start with, and then I'll talk it through. So my interest in paper collage came through various twists and turns. An important point in the process was I was registered in the fall of 2001 at RISD's, which is Rhode Island School of Design. Some of you know, maybe some don't, the Master of Architecture program. And this was a time when there was starting to be a lot of interest in environmental issues and sustainable design and construction. And the LEED certification program, which is an acronym for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, had just begun a few years ago. And so as a part of this movement, architects were paying attention to the types of materials used to make buildings and the way the materials related to the natural environment. So the Swiss architects Herzog and Demeron were leaders in exploring this issue. So this is an example of one of their works. This is a winery complex in California they designed. It's the Dominus Winery in Napa, and the primary building material was locally quarried basalt stones, and they were placed in wire containers called gabions. And it also served the function of protection from heat during the day and cold at night, also allowing varying degrees of light to pass through depending on the needs of the different parts of the winery. And that's another example. That's the interior of the winery. So the next is an image again of a Herzog Demeron work, and I was fortunate enough to see this. I was in Madrid, Spain, 2 summers ago, and this is it's like a dramatic feature. It's a vertical garden, a dense cluster of plants growing in a felt-like layer, and it covers the side of the building, and it's so cool to watch them. They water it and they spray with the, just like you would any other garden, but it's just vertically that they're trying to hydrate the whole thing. So Madrid has a hot, dry climate, and the city is trying to combat the temperatures that are only getting worse due to climate change through, the extensive introduction of green plants in various forms, including green roofs and this green wall. And in addition to, thermal effects, the introduction of planted surfaces also reduce the urban noise. This is particularly pertinent to how I got to where I am. So this is Japanese architect Shigeru Ban, and this is it's an architect whose work is focused on the nature of materials being used. So Ban's interests was in using perhaps the most humble material of all, which is paper, because it's not really considered practical. He was not so concerned about practical and ecological matters. It was more a question of the role of architecture in society that he was worried about. So this image is the paper log house that Bond created as an emergency housing. And it was following an earthquake in Kobe, Japan. And Bond had done a lot of work that addresses problems of displaced people in the wake of natural man-made disasters. And his paper log houses were more designed to meet the need of something that could be quickly, easily, inexpensively built. And also dismantled, recycled when no longer needed. And the paper tubing that much of his work employs serve these kind of purposes. So if you look, the foundation is made of plastic beer crates. You can see those below. And there are sandbags. And the crates were provided by the Sapporo Brewery Company in Japan. And Bond has said that he and his students were hoping that it was kind of funny because, you know, he's got this whole crew of people that they were hoping that when the Sapporo Brewing Company sent these crates, it would be filled with free beer. But unfortunately, the crates arrived empty. So Bond thought these paper houses were the ultimate in practicality, and even joked if you ran out of toilet paper, you could just maybe tear off a piece of the wall. But Bond also proposed this next thing, which is a temporary church building, also made out of cardboard tubes. And when the Kobe earthquake led to a fire that destroyed the church, this was his solution. And the cardboard tubes were made waterproof and fireproof. And this church actually stood for 10 years. And so I graduated in 2004. Shigeru Bond continued to work on designs, amazing environmental conscious structures, and was awarded the prestigious Pritzker Prize in 2014, which is essentially the Nobel Prize in architecture. So here's a just kind of a photo of move-in day, the beginning of a pre-pandemic academic year at RISD. And, you know, RISD is an environment, and probably many of you have gone there, where there's just very few restraints on how students express their individuality. And yet I felt a little bit of kind of out of place because I got interested in exploring the materiality of paper for design purposes. And it was a different approach for the professors who are used to guiding students and solving some sort of problem like needing a house or a school or a factory or a hospital. And so my professors were less than enthusiastic about my idea for my master's thesis. And it ended up being a little it was definitely different than most of my classmates. But here are a few samples of my exploration into materiality, especially exploring paper. That was actually a full-scale thing that was built for my thesis, where people were able to walk through it, these columns of paper. So as I was getting closer to graduation, I sensed I was not heading for a traditional architecture career, and I took some inspiration from James Dyson of the Dyson vacuum cleaner company. He visited RISD when I was a student and gave a talk about the process of designing now famous bagless cyclone vacuum cleaners and his struggle to make it practical and a marketable product. And Dyson actually dedicated 15 years of his work on this concept and made 5,127 different prototypes until finally making the one that he thought was satisfactory. And he said there were tough times, but each failure brought him closer to solving the problem. it wasn't the final prototype that made the struggle worth it. It was the process that bore the fruit, and he just kept at it. And Dyson's experience sort of inspired me to be persistent and looking for a way to apply my interests. So I worked on various paper-based designs and graphic design projects, also relying on my interest in color theory. I had taken a summer class on color theory at RISD, then spent 2 years flying back and forth to San Diego for seminars in order to complete an accredited program of the International Association of Color Consultants. These are some of the things I was working on. Some like business cards. This was the one on the left for a knitting company. I like this. The lamb was just knitting its own fur to make it. And then a dog walking company. But I worked on, gift cards, book illustration, interior design consulting. On the left, Newton South Little League had me do for several years their annual yearbook, different logos for Brown Middle School. On the right was some Boy Scout posters that I had produced. But ultimately, I started making art in a collage style that kind of pulled together all of my interests. From the environmental dimension, I worked entirely with discarded magazines. And so my art is a recycling process. And a lot of artworks, they require toxic paints and thinners and resins and things that with collage and paper, I'm generally able to avoid. I rely on my architectural studies to figure out how to depict representational perspective. I use my experience in working with color theory to find ways to create visual elements that work together. And in addition to recycling paper, my work is also conceptual recycling, because I reuse printed images and words in a new context. So I want to talk a little bit about some of my themes and challenges that I encounter in collage. This work is, it's about the potential. So I work from photographs. I'm absolutely a terrible photographer. So I have to, I go and I scope out a site and I'll take hundreds of photographs and I'll move 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, to the side, whatever. But I'm ultimately looking for a composition, not like a photography standard. It's more like, what do I see as the potential that could be an interesting collage? So I use this work, and I was really interested with the flowers and the lights and the background of the building. And this is the collage that resulted. So I altered the palette and I use this as the basis. The previous is the base for my artwork. And here's a little side by side that you can see. But something else that I have a lot of fun with is I want people in Boston to be really, to really enjoy, people who are not in Boston, to just look at our city and say, wow, what a freaking cool city that we live in, that they live in. And so I'll take out people. This guy on the left was a construction worker. And so I try to glam it up in the town and add hip looking people like the guy I substituted with, because I want people to think our town is really cool. This is another image that I thought could make a really dynamic collage. And the city scenes are some of my favorite collage subjects, in the part of Washington Street in Boston around the Paramount Theater, I feel is particularly exciting. And so that's what came of that particular work. There was some editing involved that involved removing poles, some walk signals, intensifying the existing colors, adding a bit of the beginning of a sunset, because I thought that complemented the foreground. And I often use text from a work for the work's titles. And in this case, the work was, it's hard to see, but right below where the tiny part of Paramount says, there's a word that says block party. And I sort of felt like this was sort of like a block. It's like a block in the city, and it's like a little bit of a party going on. And so that became the name of the work. So here's a close-up of the work. All of the lettering, for example, in the Nutcracker, Opera, Modern, is all hand cut. I use my architectural desk. I use X-Acto knives, metal triangles. I use a little standing lens that enlarges or magnifies what I'm trying to cut. And that's how I get to that. Another image which shows just some of the reflections in the car that are bouncing off of buildings. So as you can imagine, my studio is just a model of extreme precision. I'm a pretty strict disciple of the tidiness guru, Marie Kondo. Okay, actually, here's my real studio. It's a disaster, and I do try to clean it up every project or every other project. My son Jake has said, just don't clean it up, but I've fallen on magazines, and actually, I broke one of my fingers. So I do try, and I do clean up, but I organize materials. People often say, what is the process? And I guess people generally assume that I'm just sorting colors, but I find it much easier to take a magazine. You get to know magazines, and what you're seeing there is just one stack, one little area where in the background where things are organized, but there are multiple stations and with all kinds of magazines arranged by title. And you get to know, like, if you're looking for burgundies, it might be food and wine or such. And it's so much easier to just flip through a magazine than to try to sort through a pile of papers and to try to find what you hope. So that's one of the things I like. It keeps me challenged. Sometimes people say to me, if you were, what's your kind of fantasy of a collage? And, I'm surrounded by, when I'm flipping through magazines, all kinds of scents and fragrances from, perfume ads. And I think one day I'd like to do a scratch and sniff artwork. That'd be really fun. So when I use text in artwork, I like to find words and phrases that refer to a theme of the work or something about my approach or background or techniques. This work is called After 5, but I don't know if you can see on the boat on the right, it's got in the corner the words "an architect," although I drifted. That was me. And it's, I thought it was kind of funny because there's the thing about the boat. And then in the same boat in the top right, it says "long hours making," and just thinking, also under the little bench, thinking, building, and creating art for living good. So I'm just, sometimes it's about the work, sometimes it's about me and what I'm thinking about at the moment. And sometimes it just happens that words happen because they just happen to work with the hue or whatever, I just leave them in, and they might not be relevant to the work, but I don't want to exclude them. It's just part of the nature of the whole beast. So, I've been asked different things. It's kind of funny. At one exhibit, I was asked whether there were any subliminal messages in my artwork, and I was kind of caught off by the question, and I said no, and the guy walked away, and he was just no longer interested in my art if there wasn't some hidden message. So I just thought, next time I'm just going to say, yes, there are subliminal messages. And if you buy this work, all the subliminal messages will begin to reveal themselves to you. So one of the fun things I find about collage is there can be play on words and images. And this particular work was called Boston Moves, and it uses sorts of references. Boston was recently determined to have the worst traffic in the country. And so I've included in the work, by the way, I don't know if you can see, the black says, in the gray part right next to the black, it says 187 miles per hour. And then it says, look out, here we come, I think in the black part. So in addition to the references to the move, there's this moving van. So this is all called Boston Moves. So this literally, there was a moving van, and the moving van was called Boston Moves, which I thought was kind of fun because Boston doesn't move. But it kind of shows how clogged things are on Boylston Street. And here are people actually like loading things into cars, moving. So there's the idea of moving and not moving because the city the traffic is a disaster. So I put in this image of a clock on a rear window of the car to show how people are just keeping time and how they're just stalled by this whole process. This work that's the point. And I used to live in New York, and I love the way that brownstones with large windows would be close to the sidewalk, so you could look inside people's homes. And I like the sense of being able to be able to see into a three-dimensional open space. So just, kind of getting a little glimpse of something that you might not otherwise be able to see. That was the idea with the door swinging open in this work. And, I try to create those experiences in my work with ways for the viewer to get into the space and create the feeling of being an active participant. And this work, it seemed to resonate with people. I mean, the gallery said they had 3 people who wanted to buy this after seeing it. One of the other things I find really fun to do with collage is playing with images. So this work is an image of the Boston Marathon. And I was thinking about how the bombing attack might have changed the way people's perception of the marathon, about the perception of the marathon and police presence. And at the time, the Black Lives Matter movement had brought a lot of criticism of policing. And so I thought about merging a Black person's face with the police cyclists. And so in the helmet, if everyone could just look at the helmet for a moment, there's actually a Black man's face. And I'm just take a second to see if you can find it. And there it is, to the left of the yellow stripe. So it's just this juxtaposing of images. Actually, there's actually a couple other faces in there, but you can see that. And then once you see it in the original work, you can't unsee it. But it's kind of interesting because I noticed that young children are really good when I tested them in finding these kind of images. I think because their brain just doesn't, the way we want to close things, their brain is still seeing things as disparate elements. This was another little hidden image thing. That's my son, Will, on the right. He wanted a collage of himself. He was part of a rowing team, and this is a close-up of the team. And I wanted to show the guy on the left, his hat, it's the white cap or baseball cap that he's got over his head. My son, Will, was interested in rowing, but he was also really interested in baseball, and who didn't love David Ortiz at that time? So I don't know can anyone find in the baseball cap David Ortiz? This was part of my idea of like hiding little fun things. And there he is. So one of the things I really love about collage is representing surfaces and reflections. It creates a special sort of intellectual puzzle for me. This particular work called Boston Coffee is a scene from the North End. And if you look at the image on the left where it says coffee, underneath was something I worked really hard on. It had 3 layers of reflection. You can see a part of a car, which was a car that was moving away from the right that was captured in the window. There are the images of the things on the shelves there, and then there are reflections of things that are reflecting into the mirror. So it was really fun to try to find a way to use paper in order to represent 3 different layers of reflections in a window. This was another window type reflection, Paramount reflected. And on the left is somebody's walking down the street, but there's a mirror. And so it reflects everything that you see on the right. And especially, I like the way when there was a divider in the mirror, suddenly it changed the appearance. So you can see that kind of yellowy stripe of there are different like floors, and then to the right of it, it ripples. The other thing was like the Paramount itself, it just sort of like doubled. So the sign, there was the pink, and then I did like another layer of like a different shade of pink to show how it just kind of shifted because it was in a reflection. This was another one, just working with cars and reflections in windows. I always have a lot of fun with that, and we can show a little close up, but just showing the reflection of the taxi sign, the buildings that are reflecting. On the right, more buildings and just the pavement, et cetera, that's getting into the car. Just a couple more on reflections. Water I love to do. This was a work called Let's Go Fishing. It's some of the fishing boats that head out towards Martha's Vineyard, and it was fun to work with the water. These strips were just hand cut strips, just these long strands that I would just intricately work each little piece and then apply to the canvas. Ducks and swans. I've done this particular collage a number of times. People love this part of the public garden. And sometimes I just love to cut out, shapes that mimic expanding circular ripples from an object like a duck. And then just like all the reflections from the trees and such I find really beautiful. And this was a commission work. Somebody had asked me it was for a grandchild. They wanted some candy to put in their work. And I found it to be a real challenge because I had to use hundreds of pieces of paper with different shades. And you can see like the way I got the foils was just strips of paper side by side in order to get the silver and the gold kind of images once the candy was twisted. But then there were some fun words like wrapped in and sweet and loved and all of that sort of stuff. This work called Gotta Have Glam, it comes from some text that is in there. I have a lot of fun. I've done this a couple of times, and I'm always asked whether there is any paint in my artworks. There isn't, but people have a hard time believing that. So I thought it would be kind of fun to play with the irony of making paint tubes entirely out of paper. I'm also making an artwork form from images of other artists' works too. You can see that like there's some images in the paint tubes of, in this one right here, Roy Lichtenstein. I also have Andy Warhol right above maybe you can see the Norman Rockwell with his pipe. Keith Haring was in some of these paint tubes. Plus, there are images of emerging New England artists, sort of rubbing shoulders with the super famous artists. For example, part of a Helen Frankenthaler's painting is near one of her daughter-in-laws, Jeannie Motherwell, who actually happens to be an artist in the Boston area. So I wanted to talk a little bit about commission works. Currently, about 1/3 of the work that I do is commissioned. This one was done for Tufts Medical School. They'd put on and they'd built a new conference center and they wanted to have a couple of works. They commissioned me to represent the conference center, and they wanted something local in the area, and they just weren't thrilled with their location, and they just thought it didn't have potential. But they're at the end of Washington Street, Chinatown in Boston, and I felt like I think that, this sort of scene is just sort of this beautiful mixture of grit and glam. And here's a little close up. All the lettering that you see, New Saigon Sandwich, all the little Chinese letters, everything is hand cut. The exotic cocktails, the Emperor's Garden, the double layers of everything. And I just love the intensity, the kind of the pulse of the city and all these signs and everything that represented in that part of the city. So talking about commissions, this work was requested through an art consultancy firm based in Seattle, but they just opened a Boston office. And some of the consultants were familiar with my artwork because I'd done a prior project. And so I when they opened their Boston office, I was put on a short list for a project for a luxury condominium complex, which was the Clipper Ship Wharf in East Boston. And the work was to be 8 feet by 4 feet. Here's, just to give you a little sense of scale, here's me working on some details. The work, they asked how long would it take me to make the work, and I told them about 6 weeks. But I didn't hear anything from them for 6 months. And at 6 months, they contacted me and said, "Congratulations, the development committee has selected your work. We need it completed in 6 weeks." And I was this was totally unexpected. I mean, I had no lead time, and there was no notification that during the process I had moved through the 3 different stages that the decision-making committee had gone through. And but I thought, I've got to find a way to make this work somehow. So they wanted a work showing the Boston skyline from East Boston. And I went out to survey the site and discovered that I really needed to be there at sunrise to capture the shadows and illumination that really needed to make the work, the view work. And we went through this back and forth over the proposed image. It dragged on for maybe 3 weeks before they decided on an image that they wanted to work on. And there were many requests for revisions about where boats were to be shown and where they were to be located. And by the end of this, I was pretty much down to 3 weeks. So I was working about 12, 15 hours a day, nonstop. And I was starting to go a little crazy. And I started inserting little personal humor just to keep myself entertained and motivated. So if you see, sorry about that. So if you look at the building, the little blue building, which is short, it's kind of like a medium blue, almost in the center. It's a little bit to the right. And then look, you see like these 2 kind of like specks above. this is my idea of humor, and we'll just do a little blow up. So I started putting in people parachuting into the city. So, you know, I learned that the Clipper Ship folks were very pleased, but I don't know if they ever picked up on all the funny little things that were going on in the artwork. This one, Woods Hill Pier 4, another 8-foot work. It's located at the entrance of the new Woods Hill Pier 4 restaurant, which is in the Seaport District. And the owner, Kristen Canty, also has Woods Hill, a restaurant in Concord, and an organic farm in New Hampshire. The farm supplies the restaurants as well as her Mexican restaurant, Atleta in Concord. And I was on the short list. She invited me up to her farm to take a look at what goes on and how they source everything. Here's the farm. That's it. This was the baby pigs. They were roaming everywhere. Ducks they had. This is the llama. Her name was Michelle Llama. So that was cute. She herded the sheep. They had cows, they had beehives, they had herbs, I was there all day long. So I asked Kristen if she could, you know, provide me copies of magazines that she was featured in. She's pretty well known. She's a filmmaker as well. And she came to my studio and wondered how I plan to incorporate all this information, because I said, you know, I've taken all these images and she wanted a buoy's work, and she was a little uncertain as to how I would accomplish this. And I told her that, you know, it would be worked out. So the underlying fabric of the images is the farm. And it's also made up of things that were part of the restaurant, the fresh seafood, the sustainable organic food, etc. So this image just shows some of the text. It's, you know, underneath you might be able to see between buoys, there's cockles and shells and mussels and different things. The next one, again, to the left, it says seaside, seafair. There are little bits of shells. It says go fish. The next one at the top right, you can see some of the pigs. There's actually a lamb in the middle that's woven into the nets. There's the cow. Does it say? I don't know if you can see it, but it says from farm to table. And then to the right of that buoy that's white, orange, and black, it says tops and bottoms, which was a reference to the restaurant was named one of the most sustainable restaurants in Massachusetts. So that was just showing how they used every bit of the food. This one was, they had a beehive. And so I took pictures of that, and the yellow buoy was parts of the beehive. There were close-ups of the bees themselves. There's like a little honey dipper there that made up that particular buoy. But down below you see Sea Farm and Vine, which was about things sourced from the sea, from her farm, and the vines, herbs and wine, et cetera, et cetera. Right above, cows, there are bits of pigs in the ropes, lambs woven in. To the far left, the buoy is cheese. It says blue, it's cheese, and it's farm-made cheese. And there I am. This, again, just talking about commission. So I want to talk about like extremes. So this is one extreme. So this is Signature Bread, and they sell partially baked bread, mostly to restaurants that you know, complete the baking process and serve up hot bread and rolls. And if you've ever had a crusty roll at a restaurant, there's a good chance that it started the baking process at Signature Breads. And the employees at Signature Breads wanted to commemorate their beloved president's anniversary with the company. So, you know, Signature, the owner, he treats the employees like family. Many of them have worked there for decades. And this commission came to me as a request from someone that I worked with on a previous project. And it was really a pretty short timeline. Um, the signature bread folks didn't really tell me what they wanted, but they sent me a ton of images. So they sent me bread and rolls. They sent me baguettes, ciabatta, focaccia, buns, bread and bread and bread. It just kept going and going out, going. And they sent me photos of employees. That's the owner right there in the foreground with his signature bread, with his employees in the background. There to the right is their controller who's measuring flour, throwing it. Here's somebody else just getting ready to proof some bread. And after several days of just kind of thinking and reviewing the photos, I just couldn't come up with anything. It just seemed so random. And I was going to say, I don't know. I just don't, sorry, I just can't do it. And then I got an idea. I thought, the employees are so important. And I thought maybe I could use the employees as sort of like a sepia tone background to the whole thing. There's the owner. His face is just layers of paper that I put together in order to recreate the image. There's the controller. He's throwing flour up in the air. And there's somebody with bread there. And you see above people you consider family, and there's all kinds of stuff about bread. And so I thought, like, this could maybe be the background of a whole image and just incorporate the company logo and slogan and maybe one of the nicer pieces, loaves of bread. And the idea of just all of it is about the flour. I kind of got that from the controller throwing the flour up in the air, and there's always flour in the air. So this ended up being the final work. Their logo, signature breads, Together We Rise, with all their valued employees and all that they do in the background. And then, just opposite extreme. This is talking about works that have a lot of input from people. And I think there's something about collage style that's attractive for commission works. I'm not sure what it is, but maybe it has something to do with my use of magazines, which are common throw-in materials to everyone. Or maybe it has something to do with my attempts to include personal details, humorous references. But some of the people I've worked with for commission pieces have really carried the concept of personal references to an extreme, providing lots of text and images to be worked with. So this work was a gift that a woman wanted to give to her son to commemorate his victory at the Eastern Sprints with the Brown University heavyweight crew. And I loved her passion for my process, although, it was a bit of a challenge to have a 3-page list of words and phrases to include in the piece. Fortunately, my sons had rowed, and that provided me with some magazines. There it is, the final version. But the woman who commissioned the piece fortunately she gave me pages of team statistics, rosters, and coach information, race reports, school information, and so on. And all of that had to be included. So I thought I would put it on the jerseys. There you go. So you've got crew names, the coaches, the teams that participated, their statistics, where the kid went to school, the final scores. I mean, it just went on and on and on as to all. And then here was the water with all, trying to include all the texts that she wanted, like glide across, when the crews pull together, celebrate, share your passion, speed, et cetera, et cetera. And here's one more extreme example of people getting really involved in commission work. So this was a swan boat. This person, this was a birthday gift, and the woman wanted for her birthday gift for me to do a swan boat collage, but she wanted the family members to be riding on the boat. So I was participating at Newton Open Studios for an event, and the whole family showed up and set up folding chairs outside and had me come out to photograph them. here they are. So that was, I thought it was pretty hilarious. They just showed up and said, could you take our photograph or, you know, for the next collage? And that was a reference. And there they are in the boat. Just in view of the size of the work, this is really hard to depict. The family, you know, I had to use a magnifying glass and tweezers to place little slivers on the canvas. You know, each head is probably 3/4 of an inch. But I just, you know, they wanted to be by themselves and just have themselves on the boat. And by contrast, here's what I typically have done. How many people are typically on a swan boat that I do? So I want to talk a little bit about regional favorites, and I love to do New England scenes, especially city scenes. And when I do still life type works, I tend towards regional New England items because as an artist, you will often represent the things that are iconic in your region. So if maybe you're in Alaska, maybe there's the Malamute dog, or if you're in Wyoming, you might the noble bison, or Kentucky, the elegant and athletic thoroughbred horses. But in New England, we have the majestic, glamorous lobster. And I love creating lobster collages because there's so many colors that can be drawn out, as well as unusual imagery that can be used to create them. This next image shows at the top right, ears of grilled corn. There's grilled pineapples in there, slabs of barbecued ribs. And here's some more images of lobsters that I've done. There's some images of people, just different lions, or looks like there's some kind of something that grates something, people having dinner. So I started working with a gallery in Vermont last year, and it opened up some more opportunities for New England imagery. This was family portrait. I call this work family portrait because when I went out to take some photographs at a farm in Vermont, these cows, they all just sort of lined up and looked at me as though they were posing. And the couple who bought this work had come to Edgewater Gallery, where I was showing this work for years, and they were looking for the right work, and they fell in love with this. And I loved that they named each cow after a first lady. So that made it feel special. So I had a show, a solo show at the gallery last August. There I am. This was one of my favorite works called Rise and Shine. And I had so much fun doing it because of the text and images that I used to make the work. This was kind of a juxtaposition. I took photos of like the truck and different ones of the hens and roosters, and then I put it together to make this particular collage. But here is one of the roosters, and the rooster's head is actually made of strawberries, and you can see some of the text, the rise and shine and get out of bed, and little bits of iridescent paper for the feathers. Here's the hen, some more fun text, like a mother hen, the farm, sunny side up. And I basically sort of frayed paper to create the feathered look on the bird, put dark backgrounds and layered little light pieces to make it look like the way it would lie on the particular hen, the feathers. This next work is called Stacking the Deck, comes from the text on the left. And I include some breakfast words: butter, milk from grass-fed cows, breakfast, cake, etc. For the syrup in the vessel, I used just the black background and just added some bits of color. And the stream of syrup was a nice little piece I found, and I just added to the left a little like hint of white for highlight. I also used pieces of gold colored paper to create the glistening effect of the syrup flowing over the canvas. You can see some of the words there, the breakfast and cake, etc. And just various shades of blue to create the blueberries. So this is me. And this is a company that discovered my work, Art and Fable Puzzle Company. I'm thrilled to be able that they've used my artwork to create puzzles out of my work. Here's the point that I talked about with the view inside. That's another one that's a public garden piece. And this one is just coming out this month, the Paramount Reflective, which I talked about. So here I am. I'm on Instagram, please follow me. And I just wanted to show you after this, just two quick little videos of how the work gets laid down.
Betsy, I know we've all been muted, so I don't know if you've been able to see people have been making comments in the chat box.
Not yet, but I'm going to show two really, it'll be less than 2 minutes videos of how I lay down work. And then I love to talk to people and read comments and answer any questions. There's a motorcycle. It just shows the predominant black and how things get layered on top. Just a little piece of a work. One more. It's a little bit longer. It will show a little bit more of the process. Just bear with us for 2 seconds. Pull back the arrow. So that's it.